Hello everybody, Calamity here, and I still haven't watched the Fallout show. Today's video is going to be about the topic of Genshin Impact and whether or not it's gotten boring for you. This is something I've heard a lot of my friends talk about. You know, they're tired of Genshin, they want to move on to other games now, they want to try that new Wuthering Waves game that's coming out in May, stuff like that, or they're moving on to Star Rail. And I kind of wanted to talk about, why people might be feeling that way. Maybe you're a new player and you don't get it yet. Or maybe you still enjoy the game since launch and you also don't get it yet. But regardless, I wanted to make a rant video where we kind of just kind of talk about the game, the kind of state it's in, and I'll share my 2 cents. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the main points. But the first point being is that Genshin is an old game. This game is going to turn 4 years old in September, I think. That's when the anniversary is. I can remember things, I swear. And if you've been playing this game since launch, it is totally normal for you to have some sort of burnout or get, it's a long game. What kind of name another game that you've been playing almost every day, for 4 years straight. Because with a game like this, compared to, like, let's say a multiplayer game, like if you're playing a PvP game, like let's say League of Legends, there's always something new, something different. There's always something new to learn as well. Like, you're learning a new champion. Or there's balance changes, or they add a new character and now the meta is all different, or they add new items, stuff like that. Like, things are always changing that, if you were to compare the game, at its launch to 4 years later, I'm sure they would be totally different games. Another good example of this would be a game like Path of Exile or Dead by Daylight. Now, for me personally, I don't actually get tired of playing Genshin. And there's a couple reasons for that. And yeah, one of them being is that I am a content creator. For Genshin Impact, I'm not a full-time, it's not my full-time job or anything, but because I'm a content creator and I do make money off of my YouTube videos, not a lot, it does motivate me to want to keep playing, of course, and to keep making more guides and more content, stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why I don't get tired of this game. The second reason being, I don't play this game for long hours. I've seen a lot of, like other content creators like that stream this game for like 8 hours, 4 to 8 hours, and they do all these sorts of stuff, like maybe actually 100%ing every exploration area, doing every secret side quest, every achievement, all this stuff. And I don't really do that. I do exploration to an extent, but I'm very casual with it. I don't look up guides on where every single treasure chest is in an area, and I'll just basically, what I do is what you're seeing in the background behind me is I just get on, I do my dailies, I do Spiral Abyss if it got reset. If there's story content, sure, I'll sit through it, when I have some free time. But when there's no story content like there is now, it's only like literally like 10 minutes of gameplay. Like, I get on, do dailies, spend my energy, farm for a character, and that's kind of it. It takes less than 10 minutes for me when I get on, and that's why I don't get burnt out. But let's move on to the next main point that I want to talk about, and that Genshin's combat has not changed much recently. In my opinion, the last big change that came to this game's combat system was the introduction of Dendro. Now, unfortunately, with how this game's world works, there aren't any more elements that are going to be introduced, or at least I don't think so. Suggesting things like, ooh, I would like a new element in the game with new reactions isn't something that's going to happen, or at least not anytime soon. Now, Fontaine did introduce the Uja and the Numia mechanics to several enemies and the environment, but this isn't really anything, I don't know, special. It didn't really change combat that much for me. It just made some enemies slightly easier to fight, but again, it didn't really matter at the end. And also, we don't know if this whole Uja and Numia mechanic thing will be relevant when we move to the next nation. I believe it's the Fire Nation later on this year. Also, the newer characters, not all of them, obviously some new characters have some unique playstyles like Farina and New Valette, but new characters also tend to have playstyles of previous characters we've seen in the past. So for example, Chiori is a character that came out recently, and a lot of people called her the Geo Kaching, and that's a very fair point to make, as she does have a very similar playstyle. And we're seeing this a lot, and you know, it's just one of those things, like, you know, there's already so many characters in the game. It's really hard to like not overlap character design. And so you are going to see a lot of similar things, and that can also be really boring, and you know, you lose interest in wanting to pull a character because of it. The other thing I wanted to talk about though is there isn't much power creep in Genshin. Now this might be a downside to some of you, but to me, honestly, the lack of power creep in this game is actually a really good thing. So for example, for those that don't know what power creep is when you have to pull like the new meta strong character, not because you want to, but because you need to. Otherwise, you're gonna have a really hard time struggling with whatever the new content is. And Genshin is not like that at all. So for example, if you've pulled a character like, let's say Zhongli, who I see on the screen here, congratulations, you've had the best shielder since this game was introduced, or at least since he was introduced way back in like 1.3 or something. So he's been a really strong character throughout, specifically after his little rework, but still very strong shielder. Made 90% of this game super easy. You know, another example would be Hu Tao. Hu Tao was a character that was released also fairly early on into this game's lifespan, and if you pulled for her, then you know you've also had a really strong DPS. Jing Cho, Zhang Ling, Bennett, like these are all still characters that came out early in the game's lifespan, but they're still really strong. That's what the lack of power creep means. Now, this is not true for every character in Genshin. There are definitely some characters that have been power crept, like for example Eula. Physical damage dealers in general, just, you know, they can be strong and they can do well in like exploration and stuff, but they definitely struggle when it comes to late game content like Spiral Abyss. But for the most part, power creep is not really a thing, and that to me is a good thing. But I know to some people that also means that the game can be kind of stale, because you can just rock with the same team you've been using for months and months or even years and not have to change anything. So I can definitely see both sides. The other thing is that events, at least for me, this could change, you know, depending on your playstyle or your opinion, but I think events in this game are pretty lackluster. I know they try to add some story stuff into them, and they reintroduce some characters we haven't seen in a while, and that's nice and all, but gameplay wise and stuff, I do feel like events are just rehashes of old ones, or just like nothing really interesting. Like some of the combat ones are just like, hey, do a thing and then just kill monsters again, and that's kind of boring. I do think that the Lantern Rite Festival this year was also kind of lackluster. I feel like there was a lot less games to do and a lot less fun mini games to do, in my opinion. But this doesn't have anything to do with the combat, but the story in Genshin Impact has definitely gone way better. If you were to compare, you know, in my opinion, like Fontaine's story to that of like Inazuma, the writers of this game have definitely upped their game, so to speak, and again, the story has definitely gotten much more interesting to go through. And my only critique for the story is that it does tend to be very dialogue heavy. It almost feels like we're going like an hour just listening to just characters yap all day, and I do feel like it does drag on some parts, but I still think overall the story has gone much more interesting and much better if you can actually make it all the way to Fontaine. Now let's move on to the next main point of why, you know, people are saying Genshin has gone boring, and that it has to be to the lack of, there's no endgame changes to Genshin. The only endgame content we have is Spiral Abyss, and this has been sort of a controversial topic when it comes to talking about endgame, because, you know, a lot of people do not participate in Spiral Abyss. I've heard a lot of people just say, oh, it's not worth it, you know, I'm not gonna build a team or characters for it, it's too hard, stuff like that, and most players will just ignore it. Hoyoverse hasn't really done anything to change Spiral Abyss at all. It's been the same. I mean, obviously, other than the enemy layout, they do change that, but it's been, you know, the same since it was introduced. There's been no mechanical changes to it. You know, you get a blessing and then you get to fight some enemies in the Spiral Abyss. The time requirements are still the same. I wouldn't mind if they made it a little bit easier for casual players to feel like they have you know, they could actually participate and try Spiral Abyss without it feeling too hard. Hoyoverse has decided just to leave it as is. But there is one thing I will always advocate for, and I do think Spiral Abyss does need to have its rewards buffed, because we are fighting enemies that are way harder and have way more mechanics and depth to them than when the Spiral Abyss was first introduced. Now, if you go back and like look at earlier iterations of the Spiral Abyss, you will see some basic enemies like Hilichurls, Ruin Guards, Slimes, being in like the later, like up to floors 11 and 12, and it was like really, those were considered, you know, those were the end game enemies, and that was kind of it. But now we're fighting all these crazy bosses in Spiral Abyss, but the pay has stayed the same. So in my opinion, I think the rewards should be buffed. You know, either more Primo Gems, more of those artifact boxes, more XP books, more Mora, stuff like that, or even more rewards, like maybe some standard wishes, some condensed, or some the extra resin, the item that you can exchange for extra resin would be nice, stuff like that. Seeing as how little people interact with the Spiral Abyss, I don't see this happening anytime soon. I would also love to see new endgame modes as well, but I don't want to see too much, because once there starts being a ton of endgame content, it does start getting a little too time consuming, and that's not something I want to do. I'm not trying to make Genshin this game where I have to play it, you know, 4 to 8 hours to do all the end game stuff or to get caught up. This isn't World of Warcraft. This isn't FF14 where I want to grind endlessly all day. But with that being said, I do wish that Genshin would take a page out of Star Rail's endgame book, so to speak. For those that don't play Star Rail, there is an endgame mode that they added called Pure Fiction. And Pure Fiction, basically, instead of having to fight these really, really tough enemies like you would in Spiral Abyss or Memory of Chaos, which is their equivalent to Spiral Abyss, you instead have to fight waves of weaker enemies, and you get points the more, you know, waves of enemies you kill. What this mode did was that it made units that were considered bottom tier or just straight up useless all of a sudden become these really, really strong and useful units to have for Pure Fiction. And it changed up the meta. It changed up how you thought about tackling this challenge, and that's something I really, really liked that Star Rail did. Now, I would love to see something similar for Genshin, and we have seen events where it's like kill, you know, as many waves of enemies as you can in the set amount of time in events, but we don't have any sort of end game option or like end game mode similar to that. I would love to see a mode that encourages you to use, you know, something other than just the heavy hitters, but, you know, maybe like a mode where your AoE damage is more important and not so much the high damage numbers that you need. Let's move on to the next point. There has been very little to no co-op changes for Genshin Impact. And in fact, playing co-op for Genshin outside of like domains and stuff like that is kind of counterintuitive. What I mean is that if you've ever tried to play co-op with your friends in Genshin, you can't even do simple things like dailies together. You can do some of the dailies, but the ones where you have to talk to an NPC and turn in an item, for whatever reason, Hoyoverse makes it so that you cannot interact with that NPC while in co-op mode. I don't understand why it's designed like this. It's like they almost don't want you to play in co-op mode, because, like, you know, why are we so limited? Also, exploration is also limited. If you're trying to explore a new area with your friends, well, I hope you're the one that's hosting it, because you're the one that's getting all the benefits if you are. Like, you're the one that's finding all the chests, all the oculi, all the puzzles, side quests, etc. But the people that are connecting to you, your friends, they have to go back to their own world and then re-explore everything again. I don't know why it's not like this. I do think there should be shared progress so that incentivizes you to explore a new area with your friends. I mean, that could be way more exciting than just exploring a big area on your own. You know, and you have your friends finding stuff left and right that you otherwise would have missed. And the other thing that they haven't really done is there isn't really like an end game co-op mode. And I've seen this suggested a lot, is a like Spiral Abyss, but you have to play it co-op with 4 people. Now, the big issue that I see with this is that you would definitely see a lot of people be toxic and try hard. Like, if Imagine you going into the co-op Spiral Abyss and you want to use Chi-Chi. So many people would hate you and be like, and kicking you out of the group because they're like, oh, you're not using Bennett. Oh, you're not using Zhongli as shielder. You're not using someone better. You know, and then it would make people feel bad for wanting to attempt endgame content with a character they like to play as. That would probably be the biggest problem if they were to do any sort of co-op endgame mode. You would definitely have the elitists gatekeep a lot of the casual players that want to just try the mode out. At the same time, I also feel like it would be really fun to have a really fun and challenging content to do with your friends. But that's something I don't see them doing anytime soon. And the last thing I kind of want to touch on is the lack of quality of life changes. Now, obviously, if you have been playing, Hoyoverse has been doing a lot of quality of life changes. They actually have, like, you can reclaim all of your expeditions in one button now and resend them out. That's really good. Domains are a lot easier to farm now, less walking. You start closer to where the fight is, and they've added all these artifact filters, and they've added more. You can feed more artifacts when you're trying to level them up. Stuff like that is really good. And again, I want to praise Hoyoverse for doing stuff like that. However, there are still things and, you know, weird design decisions in this game that make me question why they're still a thing. So for example, why do we have to wait certain days to farm certain weapon materials or certain talent materials? This is something, again, I'm going to use Star Rail as an example because it's the same, you know, developer. In Star Rail, you don't have to wait a day for anything. You can farm any material you want on any day. I don't know why Genshin still has this. They should definitely get rid of it. What's the word I'm looking for? It's very, like, disappointing. You pull a brand new character and you're like, oh man, I want to build this person. I think they look really cool. And then you look at their talent materials and you're like, oh, I don't have any. And it's like, it's Monday, but you can't get their material till like Wednesday at the earliest. And it's like, oh, I guess I can't build this character yet. You know, and it feels really bad in the future. Also, artifact farming in this game still sucks. I don't know about you guys, but when Navia came out, I farmed the brand new domain at the time for the artifact set, and I literally took 3.5 months of doing nonstop farming for that domain to get the artifacts to a standard that I was happy with. Now, I don't go too try-hardy on my artifacts. I'm not trying to look for, you know, perfect crit value and super min-max stats and stuff like that. I'm happy with like bare minimum stuff. I could not even get that from my Navia for such a long time, and it was a miserable process. So yeah, artifact farm, like, they have tried to make it better with strong boxes being a great way to not have to farm certain domains, which is good, and the filters and stuff, but actually trying to get the artifacts that you want and need, and then having to roll them just for them to roll, you know, that flat defense or flat HP after trying so hard is so unmotivating and so disappointing. I don't know how you would make it a little bit better, or at least increase the drops overall. There should definitely be more double drop event. Actually, I don't think Genshin has ever had a double drop event for artifacts, which is kind of weird. And the last thing probably is that Genshin Impact is still pretty much a greedy game. If you want to guarantee yourself a character and their weapon, you're going to need to actually save for months, unless you get really lucky, of course. And Genshin, despite being, you know, as old as it is, has really not been any more generous with its rewards. It's still very greedy, and again, it still feels like you have to save for long periods of time to get what you want. And that's not something a lot of people want to deal with. They'll want to play, you know, other gacha games where they can do more pulls and stuff like that. And I think that's about it for this video. I've been yapping for a really long time. Hopefully it was entertaining to listen to. I just wanted to kind of just rant. If you are feeling like Genshin, you know, has gotten boring for you, don't be afraid to take breaks. It's totally fine. You know, if you're not finding this game fun anymore, to go ahead and try that other gacha game that's coming out, the Wuthering Waves one or whatever, or take a break from gacha games in general if you don't feel like playing them anymore. It's totally fine. If you want to take a break, you lost interest, you want to come back later, come back in a year or so. We're gonna have like another nation for you to explore, a lot more story, definitely a lot more characters to pull from. You know, maybe the current characters don't really interest you. So you can always come back later. You know, you came into this game wanting a challenge, like a really challenging end game, or like to grind endlessly for it. I don't think Genshin is quite that kind of game. Unless you really want to like min-max some artifacts, I guess you could grind for those or something. But if you do decide to come back to Genshin, don't forget my channel exists, and I'll probably still be making guides for this game, as well as other videos. Because again, I still enjoy it. I still enjoy playing the game, and it's a lot of fun for me. And I don't get burnt out because, you know, again, I just play this game in small bursts, small 10-minute bursts daily, and that's about it until new stuff comes out. And with that being said, thank you all for watching and listening to me rant. Anything you feel like you want to share about the game, like if you're still enjoying it, or if you found other aspects of the game boring that I didn't touch on, feel free to mention those in the comments. I'll be checking them out. And don't forget to leave a like and or subscribe to the channel. If you like this sort of content, I'll be making more in the future. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.